So here's a throwback. This is one of the first ITX systems that I ever built. I built two similar systems to this around the same time. One I built for my uncle and one I built for my cousin. And this is my uncle's. He's been using it this whole time. It must have been roughly 11 or 12 years ago that I built this. I don't even really remember for sure. I do remember that it was Windows 8 when I built it. I'm assuming that my uncle, at some point has updated it to Windows 10, but of course it is too old to update to Windows 11. It's also apparently been blue screening lately, so I'm not sure. But yeah, if this was built, 11 or 12 years ago, and it really worked this whole time up until just recently, again, when it has started to blue screen. And again, this is like the first ITX system that I ever built. Again, first or second, because I built one for him and I built one for my cousin around the same time. But they were both very similar. They were both based on this in-win case. So this is an in-win case that came with its own power supply. It's a very small power supply. I mean, both physically and, the wattage of it, it's probably like a 200 watt power supply. I don't remember. But I do remember at the time when I built these that I wasn't really too sure about the long-term reliability of this power supply. I wasn't too sure about the power supply because it is almost a proprietary size. It's not like SFX. It's more like the size of like the power supply that you might see in like one of those like Lenovo Think Center or HP, whatever their little like the business systems that are roughly this size. That is to say, it's not as wide as an SFX power supply, but I think it's a little bit longer. Kind of has that long shape to it, like those proprietary kind of OEM power supplies. And if the power supply ever went on this, again, I was kind of worried, like how long is this power supply going to last? And if it does turn out to be not reliable, it's going to be hard to find a replacement. So that was a little bit of a worry, but here we are 11 or 12 years later, and it, I think for the most part, still works. Again, it is blue screening. I'm not sure why, but I mean, assuming it's not the power supply has lasted this whole time. So yeah, I figured this is a little bit of a throwback. We'll open it up. We'll see what's inside of it. I'm guessing if it's 11 or 12 years old, it's probably going to be like a second or third generation Core i3, maybe a fourth generation Core i3. I do believe it's a Core i3, but I don't remember. Again, I built two of these similar around the same time, and I'm sort of thinking maybe one of them was a Core i3 and one of them was a Core i5. But again, I don't remember, so let's open this thing up. And, well, yeah, she's a little dusty inside. Yeah, that might just be the issue there. The heatsink is pretty much completely clogged. So it's possible that it's just been overheating. There's a side exhaust fan or intake fan. I'm not too sure. That might be an intake fan. And really, if that's an intake fan, the only exhaust is through the power supply. There's the fan right here for the power supply. And then that would be an exhaust. Yeah, pretty dusty in here. Actually, I wasn't sure if this had a solid state drive or a hard drive in it. And it looks like this was, I think this was replaced. I think when I built this initially, so first of all, if it was like 11 or 12 years ago, SSDs were still, they weren't crazy expensive, but they were still like a little bit more expensive, and this was definitely a budget build. Again, I think this is like a Core i3. Again, it's from my uncle who just does basic web browsing. Didn't need much. Again, at the time, this was Windows 8, and I believe it initially had a 1 terabyte hard drive in it. I do remember this having a Western Digital Blue 1 terabyte hard drive in there. And I do remember that hard drive failing what felt like relatively quickly, like I think 2 years after I built it. The hard drive failed, and so it looks like I replaced the hard drive with an SSD, and I didn't even bother mounting it in there, although it's just an SSD, so that's not a huge deal. Again, it was a couple years after I built it that the hard drive failed, which pretty unusual. I've had a lot of Western Digital and Seagate hard drives, and I've had pretty good luck with both brands. I think I've had one Seagate drive fail in my life, and I've had one Western Digital drive fail. Not super common that like 2 years in on a light use machine that the hard drive would fail, but who knows? It kind of worked out in this case if it got an SSD. This is an ADATA. Oh, well, where's the size on there? SU800 SATA 6 gigabit model, and 256G at the end of the model name. So it is a 256 gigabyte SSD, and that was probably like $100 at the time, but it definitely needs to be cleaned out. So I do have this. Well, I have a battery powered one too. I have a small battery powered, like rechargeable type C duster / vacuum. This one you plug into the wall, and this thing's got some serious torque. This will blow all the dust out easily. So, yeah, I guess I'll take it outside. We'll blow out the dust, and then we'll plug it in, and we'll see what CPU is in here. That's better. You can actually see through the heatsink. Yeah, that thing does a great job. The battery-powered one, it's okay for light use, but yeah, it's nowhere near as powerful as the plug into the wall. Plug into the wall one. So, yeah. Anyways, let's plug this thing in and see what it's got inside. Well, the booting up into Windows 10, it's perfectly possible. The only thing wrong with it was the dust. But, that's an assumption. Maybe the SSD is failing. Not the fastest thing in the world, considering this is Windows 10 on an SSD. Maybe the SSD is failing. Maybe it's jam-packed full to the brim. Oh my gosh, I just noticed the motherboard still has the price tag on it. $107.99 Canadian. So roughly 11 or 12 years ago, you could buy an ITX motherboard for $107. Yeah, they're a little bit more expensive than that nowadays. Okay, so it did blue screen there. Unmountable boot volume. So yeah, there's something wrong. It could just be corrupt Windows files. It could have been crashing a lot because it was overheating. Perhaps it was shutting down, I was going to say intermittently or randomly shutting down a lot. And of course that would cause system files to get corrupt. So we might just try to install Windows 11 on this. And see where that gets us. Again, can't normally install Windows 11 on a machine older than, I think it's an 8th generation Intel. And again, this is probably like a 2nd to 4th generation Intel. So it won't officially take the Windows 11 updates. But yeah, of course, there's ways to get around it. I wanted to get into the BIOS or the UEFI. This might be this would be an early UEFI machine. Yeah, I don't know if it's delete or F12. Spam everything on the keyboard. There we go. So, what do we got in here? I thought it would tell us right here on the main screen. It tells us it's got 8 gigs of RAM. I kind of figured it probably had 8 gigs of RAM. Even 12 years ago, that was kind of the minimum that you would want, again, for an entry-level machine like this. So yeah, it's a Gigabyte H77N Wi-Fi, and it cost $107.99. Whenever that came out. Now, I don't even remember off the top of my head, H77, what generation that is. So this is still not telling us what CPU it has in it. There we go. Core i3 3220. So it is a 3rd generation Core i3. And that would put it at roughly, I think roughly 11 to 12 years ago. That was my guess. Copyright on the BIOS is 2011. But if it's a generation, it's roughly a generation every year, and we're on the 15th generation now. So, yeah. That's 12 years ago. I'm willing to bet there's nothing wrong with the hardware, other than maybe the SSD is bad. But I think, honestly, we'll just try installing Windows 11 on it and see how it runs. So here we got our boot menu. I'm going to make sure that we're booting the UEFI USB, because, of course, this is UEFI firmware or BIOS or whatever you want to call it. It is new enough that it has that. It's probably right at the cusp of having that, to be honest. And our USB installation is set up as a UEFI. So this should start the Windows 11 installation. Now, if you're curious about installing Windows 11 on a machine that normally wouldn't let you install, this is so old that normally we wouldn't be allowed to install Windows 11 on this machine. Like, again, it's older than like 8th generation. It doesn't have a TPM module. Normally the Windows installer would just be like, nope. But of course, we've bypassed that. It's actually not too hard to do. I'll have a link in the description showing a video explaining it. But basically, you just need to make your own boot USB stick using Rufus. And you can use the official Windows 11 ISO. So I just downloaded the Windows 11 ISO directly from Microsoft and made my own custom bootable USB stick that will bypass any of the checks for like Windows 11 requirements and just let it install. And this should work, assuming there's nothing else wrong with this computer. Again, we don't know. Was it just shutting down because of all the dust, or is the SSD failing, right? The SSD is not as old as the computer. Again, this originally had a 1 terabyte hard drive in it. Several years after I initially built it, that failed, and we swapped in the 256 gigabyte ADATA SSD. But that SSD is still probably, 9 years old, if I had to guess. So, again, depending on how heavily it's been used, 9 years on a ADATA SSD, it's possible the SSD needs to be replaced, but we don't know. I guess we'll find out. So I think this SSD is dead. The install keeps crashing at just a black screen when I have this ADATA SSD installed, but then I installed my own, this old Kingston 120 gig that I had lying around, and it's not crashing at the same spot. So that's all I have to go off now. I assume this is bad. Again, this is a 256 gigabyte SSD. It's probably 9 years old. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't see a date code per se. That warranty code might incorporate a date code, perhaps, if you knew how to read that. But yeah, I'm not sure. But I think this drive, again, I think it's about 9 years old. So maybe it's toast. At the time, a 256 gigabyte SSD, this might have cost $100 9 years ago. Whereas now you can get, a terabyte SSD for that price. So I might just replace it with like a 1 terabyte SSD anyways, but we'll continue with the installation on this drive just so we can test everything and make sure the rest of the system seems to be working fine But again, I can't even get the Windows install past really the first initial screen. It wouldn't even make it to this screen. It would just crash at a black screen and hang there with this. So it seems to be that the SSD is the issue, but again, we'll continue with the installation and we'll see how everything runs. Is this what the install looks like on the latest Windows 11 build? That is so weird. Normally, I think you'd have like a white screen and you'd see like a little bit more details. But here it just says, yeah, installing Windows 11. Yeah, this is the latest build of Windows 11. Like I said, I downloaded the ISO straight from the Microsoft website. So, yeah, it's installing. I guess we'll just let it finish. And again, we'll see how it runs. Alright, so Windows 11 is on this machine. As you can see, it booted up fairly quickly. Again, this is off my Kingston SSD, as the ADATA one seems to be dead. I'll have to run some tests on it. Maybe plug it into another computer and see, but again, for the price of that 256 gigabyte SSD, for the price that was 9 years ago, I can pick up a 1 terabyte SSD today. So I might just go ahead and put 1 terabyte SSD in it. Realistically, for under $100 Canadian, or roughly about $100 Canadian, I can pick up 1 terabyte SSD. And that seems to be all this thing needs. I mean, it's running fine otherwise. Again, this is a Core i3 3rd generation, 3220. Yes, it's an old Core i3, but keep in mind, this is an ITX build, but it is a custom off-the-shelf build. This is a full-blown desktop CPU. This isn't a mobile CPU. This isn't a T-series CPU, which, despite the T standing for turbo, those are still slower than regular desktop. Standard desktop CPU is faster than a T-series. So you'll see a lot of the mini, business machines. They'll have like a T at the end. And you think, wow, turbo, it's faster. No, it's faster than the standard mobile version. It's still not as fast as just a standard desktop. Again, it's 3.3 gigahertz. It's only 2 cores, 4 threads. But, 3.3 gigahertz is no slouch. Obviously, again, it's an older, lower-end CPU. I'm not saying that it's going to be super fast. But for basic use, it's probably adequate. Let's go to YouTube and just see how it handles YouTube. Well, I mean, you can see there coming up. It's not the fastest thing in the world. But, once this is scrolling, this is actually not too bad. How's it going to handle playback, though? Let's see. Go full screen. I'll go defaulted to 1080p 60. Let's go to stats for nerds. And where's our dropped frames? I know somewhere here it will show. Yeah, dropped frames. It dropped 7, and I'm assuming that was early in, because now it's not dropping any. Current 1080p 60, and it's not dropping any frames. That's fine. This is totally fine. Yeah, that's, again, for basic use, I would bet that this is faster than the 4th generation Core i5 that's in my Lenovo ThinkPad T440S, because again, that is a mobile CPU. And mobile CPUs are nowhere near as performant as desktop CPUs. Again, 12-year-old computer, let's say 11 to 12-year-old computer, 9-year-old SSD. Let's assume the SSD is dead, okay? A 9-year-old SSD, that's fairly normal, I would say. 9 years under normal use? Yeah, I won't be surprised if the SSD is dead. But for the rest of the computer, I mean, it seems to be working fine here. Again, this is my Kingston 120 gigabyte SSD, so it's 90 gigabytes free of 111. And yeah, this is Windows 11 running just fine on a 3rd generation Core i3, 2 cores, 4 threads. But again, for basic use, if this is all this needs is a $100 SSD, I think that's fine. I think this is fine. Again, it is older, and it's not going to be the fastest thing out there, but for basic use, again, just basic Facebook and doing your online banking and, you know, maybe printing the odd thing, that's all this is going to get used for. I think it's fine. All right, so as far as I can tell, this is dead. When I plug this into my PC, well, so first of all, when we try to install Windows 11 onto here on this PC, the Windows 11 installation just like locks up. When I plug this into my PC is a Windows 11 PC, my PC will lock up, or at least File Explorer will lock up. I plugged this into my laptop, so my ThinkPad T440S, which is running Linux, and Linux was able to see it almost immediately. And I was able to copy most of the files off of it. Some of the files wouldn't copy, but most of them did. But I couldn't write to the drive at all. I couldn't format partitions. I couldn't delete any partitions. I couldn't even run a benchmark on the drive because the benchmark needs to write to the drive. So even the benchmark said you can't write to the drive. So I'm assuming this drive is dead. 9 years old, not a surprise. Cheap fix though, so I picked this up. This is a Team Group 512 gigabyte SSD. This was $39.99 Canadian. Yeah, it's like $30 US. So very cheap fix. It will be back up and running and good to go. So honestly, for that price, we doubled the storage space. Again, it had a 256 gig in it. This is a 512 gig. So for $30 US, we doubled the storage space. We were able to get Windows 11 on it. Honestly, yeah. The question in this video at the beginning was, is this thing still usable? Or like, how is it holding up? And well, the answer is yes, it's still usable. It's holding up very well. I mean, 12 years, and really all it's needed in 12 years, well, it did need the initial hard drive replaced a couple of years in. But in the last 9 years, the only thing it's needed is the SSD replaced. And yeah, cheap fix. So cheap fix, and it's going to be back up and running with Windows 11. So, yep, that's it. See you later.